how are we going to ensure that the people at the polling station level, whether they're polling agents or electoral officials, have the space and the support of these different stakeholder groups if we don't take the time and make the commitment to educate everybody? And I think this is one of the major issues, one of the reasons we saw so much fraud in the elections last year, is that people had no understanding. I believe there were more people engaged in trying to circumvent the process than actually trying to support it and work within it. Simply put, the education of public officials about their roles and responsibilities in a representative democracy and during elections is critical to providing the space that electoral officials are going to need to properly perform their duties. You know, one of the issues that's come up right now is within the last 10 days, the President has issued a decree amending the election law. And there's been a lot of controversy. And from the perspective of the ECC, it's the composition of the ECC last year consisted of the commission I'm now talking about, consisted of 5 commissioners, 3 of whom were appointed by the UN, by the Secretary, or the Special Representative of the Secretary General, SRSG, and 2 were appointed by Afghan institutions. 1 was appointed by the Supreme Court, 1 was appointed by the Human Rights Commission there. This new law that's now been amended only allows for the appointment of Afghans in those positions by the President in consultation or after consultation with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, as well as the speakers of the Walesi Jirga and Mishrano Jirga. From my personal perspective, I think this is a step back. One of the problems that existed in last year's election was that the Independent Election Commission was seen to be too partial to the President. They did not take their role in an objective and independent manner. And now there seems to be the opportunity for the President to exert even more control over the process. And again, my personal opinion is this is a step back. What hasn't taken place is an honest, public, and objective assessment of what went right and what went wrong in last year's election. The National Democratic Institute came out in the late November, early December of last year and suggested a Kriegler type of commission. And for those of you who may not know Justice Kriegler, he played a very important role in after 2007 elections in Kenya, and went in and did a very comprehensive and objective assessment of the things that didn't go particularly well. And I think it's extremely important that if we're going to start moving the yardsticks forward, and if we're going to start making sure that elections that are scheduled for this September in Afghanistan are going to engage more people than they did last time, are going to be seen as legitimate and credible in the eyes of the Afghan population, then we're going to need to be honest about what needs to happen, what corrective action needs to happen. And this can't be a process that's driven solely by the international community. It needs to be a process that is supported, and it needs to be a collaborative process that the different entities within the government of Afghanistan need to be engaged in and need to support as well. The work of the ECC last year also had its challenges. I talked about how there was no civic voter education. Our commission was appointed extremely late in the process. We didn't hold our first meeting until April the 26th, and the candidate nomination period started about 2 weeks after that point in time. So our ability to be involved in the candidate nomination process, our ability to get out and do public education was severely limited. We had an organization of close to about 280 people. While we have a very defined mandate and a very, I would say, quite a narrow and specific mandate under the election law, most people look on the ECC as being responsible solely for investigation and adjudication of electoral complaints. The other piece that's really not talked about, and it's not described anywhere in the law, is that we had a huge professional development challenge, because none of our Afghan staff, of which there were approximately 270, 265, had ever been involved in elections before. And so we spent an enormous amount of time, energy, resources in training our staff, and we had offices in all 34 provinces around the country, so that they were able to do their job in a transparent, in a timely, and a professional manner. This was a daunting challenge for us. We also had, we also had to deal with the resignation of one of our national commissioners, who, after the audit and recount process, resigned very publicly. Unfortunately, made a number of very disparaging remarks about the commission. And they were personal remarks, but my concern was the way it portrayed the work of the ECC, of our national staff. We were under tremendous political pressure, particularly our Afghan commissioners. And we also had to deal with a huge volume of complaints. Over 3,000 complaints we had to investigate and adjudicate that were filed on or after Election Day. That was a tremendous amount of work that had to be done. I won't get into all of our accomplishments. I think for me, the thing that I felt the most proud about was the work that our organization did. And I'm not just talking internationals. I'm grouping everybody within the same organization. Our Afghan staff in particular were extraordinary. Everybody worked very long hours. We worked through Ramadan, we worked through Eid, we worked from 7:30 in the morning until late at night, every day, 7 days a week, for months on end. And the thing that I think is, again, it's a sense of personal pride, but I think more importantly for the Afghan people, they saw an institution develop that they could rely upon, that they could look towards and be seen as doing their job in a open, transparent, public way. And I said this in a meeting with the president at one point. He was making the assertion that the ECC was an international body. And yes, we had 3 of the 5 commissioners were internationals, but the overwhelming majority of the people working in the ECC were Afghans. And I said to him that this was an Afghan institution and that the people of Afghanistan should take a great deal of pride in the work that they were able to do. And from the letters, from the conversations, from the phone calls and the emails, I think Afghans around the country understood the ECC and appreciated the work that we did. The problem was that the ECC was seen, at least last year, as the sole guarantor of the credibility and the legitimacy of the elections, and that's wrong. That responsibility, accountability, needs to happen with all stakeholders in that process. Not just the ECC, the IEC, the candidates themselves, government officials, and the voters. So, all this to say that, I'm very concerned, as I mentioned earlier, about this new presidential decree amending the election law. I think we're in a very difficult time for elections and for the democratic development process in Afghanistan. The international community and the government of Afghanistan seem to be locked in this mutual blame game. And I know many of you have read about Afghanistan, the great game that always seems to go on in Afghanistan. I'd say that the great game's been replaced by the blame game, and this is a losing strategy. We're never going to be able to move forward. And I'm talking about the international community, but more importantly, the Afghan people, if we don't look at and learn from the lessons that came out of 2009 and start moving forward.